Somewhere behind your grandmother's house, growing up through a crack in the sidewalk, or hiding in the weeds you pulled out of your garden last spring, there is a plant that contains more vitamin C than an orange, more calcium than a glass of milk, more omega-3s than a piece of salmon. And you probably threw it in the compost pile. Before the supplement aisle existed, before multivitamin was even a word, our ancestors didn't need a little orange bottle from the pharmacy. They had something better. They had the ground beneath their feet. They knew which weeds were medicine, which forgotten greens could carry a family through a long winter, and which forgotten fruits could keep sickness off the homestead for another year. Somewhere along the way, we lost that knowledge. We traded it for convenience. We traded it for a pill. Today, I'm handing that knowledge back to you. We're going to walk through 20 forgotten plant foods, some you can find growing wild in your own yard right now, others you can grow yourself with almost no effort, that work like nature's own multivitamin. No lab, no factory, no plastic bottle, just soil, sun, and a little bit of old-fashioned wisdom. Some of these plants you've pulled out of your garden bed 100 times without knowing what you were throwing away. Others used to be dinner table staples and quietly disappeared from our diets over the last century. By the end of this video, you're going to look at your backyard completely differently. So grab a notebook because you're going to want to write a few of these down. Let's get into it. Let's start right where most people never think to look, the plants we've spent our whole lives ripping out of the garden and calling pests. Number 1, Purslane. If you've ever gardened, you've met Purslane. It's the low, fleshy, almost succulent-looking little plant that creeps along the ground between your tomato rows, and most of us have spent years yanking it out without a second thought. Here's the part that changes everything. Purslane happens to be one of the richest plant sources of omega-3 fatty acids found anywhere in the plant kingdom. The same fatty acids we're told to chase down in fish oil capsules. On top of that, it's loaded with vitamin A, vitamin C, magnesium, and potassium. It has a slightly lemony, slightly salty crunch, and it works beautifully tossed raw into a salad or lightly sautéed with garlic. Our ancestors across the Mediterranean, the Middle East, and Mexico ate this plant constantly. Somewhere along the way, in a lot of Western kitchens, we simply forgot it was food. Number 2, lamb's quarters. This one goes by a few names: pigweed, wild spinach, fat hen. And if you've ever grown a vegetable garden, it has volunteered itself in your soil without being asked. Lamb's quarters is, gram for gram, more nutritious than the spinach you're paying premium prices for at the grocery store. It carries more calcium, more iron, more protein, and more vitamin A than cultivated spinach, and it grows like it's trying to take over the world with almost zero effort from you. The leaves have a soft, slightly nutty flavor, similar to spinach but a touch milder. You can steam it, sauté it, add it to soup, or use it anywhere a recipe calls for greens. This was a staple wild food for Native American communities and early settlers alike, and it's been quietly growing in the corners of American gardens this whole time, waiting to be noticed again. Number 3, stinging nettle. Now I know what you're thinking. The plant that stings you doesn't sound like something you want on your dinner plate. But stinging nettle has been used as both food and medicine for thousands of years, and once it's cooked or dried, that sting completely disappears. Nettle is packed with iron, calcium, magnesium, and vitamin K, and it has historically been used to support joint health and to help the body handle seasonal allergies. Traditional herbalists brewed nettle into tea for exactly that reason. In the kitchen, young nettle leaves can be blanched and used just like spinach, folded into soups, quiches, or a simple sauté with butter and a pinch of salt. The trick is simple. Wear gloves when harvesting, and once it hits boiling water or a hot pan, the sting is gone for good. Number 4, dandelion. The plant that's declared a public enemy on suburban lawns across the country used to be intentionally planted in kitchen gardens. Every single part of the dandelion is edible. The leaves, the flower, even the root. The greens are bitter, but that bitterness is exactly what stimulates digestion and supports liver function, something herbalists have leaned on for centuries. Dandelion greens carry more vitamin A than almost any other leafy green, along with a solid dose of vitamin K and calcium. The roasted root has long been used as a coffee substitute, and the bright yellow flowers can even be turned into a simple homemade syrup or wine. Before we started spraying our lawns with chemicals to kill this plant, it was one of the most valued spring tonics a family could get their hands on, a way to clean out the sluggishness of winter and wake the body back up. Number 5, chickweed. This soft, delicate little plant with tiny white star-shaped flowers spreads across shaded, moist parts of the yard, especially in early spring and fall. Most people never notice it, or they mistake it for just another lawn weed. Chickweed is rich in vitamin C, vitamin B, and minerals like copper and iron, and it has a mild, slightly grassy, almost pea-like flavor that works wonderfully raw in a salad. Traditionally, it was also used topically for skin irritation, but as a food, it's an easy, gentle way to add a nutrient boost to a spring meal without any bitterness at all. It's one of the first plants to appear after the cold months, which made it historically important. It gave people access to fresh greens before anything else in the garden had even woken up. So already in just these first 5, you can see the pattern forming. The plants we've spent generations pulling, spraying, and discarding were never actually the enemy. They were free multivitamins standing right there in the yard, and we simply stopped recognizing them. Here's something worth sitting with for a moment. Every single one of these 5 plants shares a common thread. They're all considered weeds specifically because they grow without our help. They don't need coddling, they don't need fertilizer, they don't need a greenhouse. They show up whether we invite them or not, and for most of the 20th century, that persistence is exactly what got them labeled as a nuisance instead of a resource. But think about what that persistence actually means from a survival standpoint. A plant that thrives in poor soil, bounces back from being mowed down, and produces food with almost zero input from us, was once considered a blessing on a homestead, not a chore. Our great-grandparents didn't waste energy fighting these plants for control of the yard. They harvested them right alongside whatever they'd intentionally planted, and they understood something we've largely forgotten, that a truly resilient food supply doesn't only come from neat, orderly garden rows. Sometimes it comes from whatever refuses to be killed. If you want a simple way to start, here's a small piece of advice before we move on. The next time you're out weeding, before you toss that pile into the compost bin, take 30 seconds and actually look at what you pulled. Chances are good that at least one of those first 5 plants is sitting right there in the pile, and now you know what to do with it instead of throwing it away. But we're just getting started. In the next section, we're moving from the weeds at your feet to a handful of forgotten greens and herbs that used to sit on every kitchen windowsill, plants with a flavor and a nutritional punch that make modern store-bought greens look pale in comparison. If the first 5 plants were things we accidentally grew and then pulled out, this next group is different. These are plants people used to grow on purpose, harvest carefully, and rely on, and somewhere along the way, they slipped out of the modern garden almost entirely. Number 6, wood sorrel. You've probably seen this one and mistaken it for clover, the little heart-shaped, 3-part leaves that pop up in shaded corners of the yard. Wood sorrel has a bright, tangy, almost citrus-like flavor thanks to its natural oxalic acid content, and it was traditionally chewed by travelers and farmhands to quench thirst on hot days in the field. It's a good source of vitamin C and adds a bright, lemony punch to a salad without needing a single drop of dressing. Because of the oxalic acid, it's best enjoyed in modest amounts rather than by the bowlful, but a small handful tossed into a dish gives it a flavor kick that store-bought greens simply can't replicate. Number 7, Amaranth Greens. Most people know amaranth as a grain, but the leaves of the amaranth plant are just as valuable, and in a lot of traditional cultures, they were the primary reason the plant was grown at all. Amaranth greens are rich in vitamin A, vitamin C, calcium, and iron, and they hold up beautifully to cooking, similar to how you'd treat spinach or chard. This plant was a dietary backbone in parts of Africa, Asia, and Central America for centuries, prized for how easily it grew and how much nutrition it packed into a single leaf. In modern American gardens, it's mostly grown as an ornamental. A shame, considering the leaves are some of the most nutrient-dense greens you can put on a plate. Number 8, sorrel. Not to be confused with wood sorrel, garden sorrel is a perennial herb with a distinct tart, lemony flavor that used to be a defining ingredient in European soups and sauces, especially in French country cooking. Sorrel is a solid source of vitamin C and vitamin A, and its sharp, acidic bite makes it a natural addition to soups, where it adds brightness without needing a squeeze of actual lemon. It grows back year after year with very little care, which made it a reliable staple for homesteads that needed food they could count on returning every spring, without having to replant from scratch. Number 9, watercress. Watercress is one of those plants that has quietly slipped out of the modern American diet, even though it used to be a common addition to soups, sandwiches, and salads. It grows in and around clean, slow-moving water, and it happens to be one of the most nutrient-dense vegetables that exists, gram for gram, loaded with vitamin K, vitamin C, and calcium. Its peppery bite is similar to arugula but sharper, and it was historically valued as a spring cleaning food, something eaten after a long winter to help the body feel lighter and more energized. If you've got access to a clean natural water source, Watercress is one of the easiest wild foods to identify and harvest. Number 10. Rose hips. The bright red or orange fruit left behind after a rose blooms and drops its petals might be the most overlooked fruit in the entire garden. Rose hips carry an extraordinary amount of vitamin C, often cited as many times higher than an orange, weight for weight, along with antioxidants that support the immune system. During both World Wars, when citrus imports became difficult to get in parts of Europe, rosehip syrup was distributed specifically to prevent vitamin C deficiency in children. They can be dried and steeped into tea, simmered down into syrup, or turned into jam. If you've got roses growing anywhere on your property and you've been deadheading the spent blooms, you may have been tossing away a homemade vitamin C supplement without ever realizing it. Notice something about this second group. These aren't obscure jungle plants or rare imports. These are things that grew in ordinary gardens, ordinary yards, ordinary ponds and creeks, within living memory. Somewhere in the last 2 or 3 generations, we simply stopped looking at them as food. It's worth asking why that shift happened so quickly. Part of it comes down to shelf life and shipping. Grocery store produce had to survive a truck ride, a warehouse, and days sitting under fluorescent lights, so the varieties that got mass-produced were chosen for durability, not necessarily for nutrition or flavor. A tender, fast-wilting green like sorrel or watercress simply doesn't hold up to that kind of supply chain, so it quietly got phased out of commercial farming, even though it never stopped growing just fine in a backyard. That's really the heart of what's been forgotten here, not the plants themselves, but the fact that some of the most nutritious food available to us was never designed to survive a 1,000-mile truck ride, which meant it had to be grown close to home, harvested fresh, and used quickly. That's exactly the kind of food a homestead is built to produce, and exactly the kind of food the modern grocery model was never built to deliver. If any of these 5 plants aren't already growing on your property, most of them are easy enough to start from seed in a small raised bed or even a large container. And several, like sorrel and amaranth, will come back year after year with almost no extra effort on your part once established. Coming up next, we're moving into the forgotten fruits, roots, and berries. The parts of the old homestead pantry that used to fill root cellars and pantry shelves all winter long, before the grocery store made all of that feel unnecessary. This next group of plants used to be the backbone of winter survival. The things stored in root cellars, dried in attics, and preserved in jars long before anyone had a refrigerator, let alone a supplement aisle. Number 11. Elderberry. If there's one plant on this list you've probably already heard of, it's elderberry, and for good reason. Elderberries have a long history of traditional use for immune support, and modern interest in elderberry syrup has exploded in the last few years, though the plant itself has been used this way for centuries. The berries are rich in antioxidants and vitamin C, but there's an important caution here. Raw elderberries and other parts of the plant need to be cooked properly before eating, since they can cause digestive upset in their raw form. Once cooked down into a syrup with a bit of honey, elderberry becomes one of the most trusted natural remedies a household could keep on hand heading into cold and flu season. A jar in the pantry that our great-grandparents leaned on long before pharmacies existed. Number 12. Hawthorn Berries. Hawthorn is a plant that has almost entirely disappeared from modern awareness, despite centuries of traditional use, particularly for heart health, in both European and Chinese herbal traditions. The small red berries have a mild, slightly tart, apple-like flavor and can be turned into jelly, syrup, or dried for tea. Hawthorn trees were often planted intentionally around old homesteads, valued as much for their thorny hedging ability as for the fruit they produced each fall. If you've got a hawthorn tree on your property and have never touched the berries, you're sitting on a forgotten piece of traditional herbal medicine. Number 13. Malabar Spinach. Despite the name, this isn't a true spinach at all. It's a heat-loving vine that thrives in the exact conditions where regular spinach wilts and bolts. Malabar spinach carries a good dose of vitamin A, vitamin C, and iron, with thick, slightly mucilaginous leaves that hold up beautifully in soups and stir-fries even in the height of summer heat. It's been a staple in South and Southeast Asian cooking for generations, but it remains almost unknown in typical American backyard gardens, even though it solves one of the most common summer gardening frustrations, greens that simply can't survive the heat. Number 14. Salsify. Sometimes called the oyster plant, because of its subtle briny flavor when cooked, salsify is a root vegetable that was a genuinely common crop in American and European gardens up through the early 20th century, and then it just quietly vanished from most seed catalogs and dinner tables. It provides fiber, vitamin C, and potassium, and it can be roasted, mashed, or simmered into soup much like a parsnip. Salsify stores well over winter in a root cellar, which is exactly why earlier generations relied on it so heavily. It was food that could survive the cold months right alongside the family that grew it. Number 15. Jerusalem Artichoke. Also known as sunchoke, this knobby little tuber is actually a species of sunflower, and it was a genuine staple food for Native American communities long before European settlers ever arrived. Jerusalem artichokes are a strong source of iron and potassium, and they contain inulin, a type of fiber that acts as a prebiotic, feeding the beneficial bacteria in the gut. They have a nutty, slightly sweet flavor, similar to a water chestnut when raw or creamy and earthy when roasted. The plant itself grows aggressively and can take over a garden bed if you're not careful, which is exactly the trait that made it so reliable for early homesteaders looking for a low-effort, high-yield food source they could count on every single year. By this point, you're probably starting to notice something. Almost none of these plants require any special skill to grow. Most of them practically grow themselves, whether we want them to or not. The real skill our ancestors had wasn't some secret farming technique. It was simply paying attention to what was already growing around them and knowing what to do with it once they found it. There's a reason this particular group of 5 carries a slightly different feeling than the first 2. These aren't casual salad greens you'd nibble on in the garden. These are provision plants, the kind that were deliberately planted, deliberately harvested in bulk, and deliberately stored away, because a family's survival through the cold months genuinely depended on having enough put back before the first frost hit. A root cellar wasn't a novelty feature on an old homestead. It was the difference between eating well in February and going hungry. Elderberry syrup wasn't a trendy wellness product. It was often the only thing standing between a household and a long, miserable bout of winter sickness, with no doctor for miles. Understanding that context changes how you look at these plants today. They're not just nutritious in an abstract, modern wellness sense. They were engineered by necessity to be dense, storable, reliable sources of nutrition precisely when nothing else was available. That's a different kind of value than a green you toss into a summer salad. And it's worth remembering the next time you walk past a hawthorn tree or a patch of Jerusalem artichokes without a second thought. We've made it to the final stretch, and this last group might be the most surprising, because several of these plants are things you've likely walked past today without a second glance. Number 16. Garden Cress. Garden cress is one of the fastest-growing edible plants that exists. Some varieties are ready to harvest in as little as 2 weeks from seed. It has a sharp, peppery bite, similar to watercress or arugula, and it's a strong source of vitamin C, vitamin K, and iron. It used to be an extremely common windowsill crop, something even city-dwelling families without any real garden space would grow in a small tray, because it required almost nothing to produce a fast, nutritious harvest. In a world of instant everything, it's strange that we lost track of one of the few truly instant vegetables that existed long before instant food ever did. Number 17. Common mallow. If you've got a patch of slightly weedy, round-leafed plants with small, pale pink flowers growing along a fence line or in a neglected corner of your yard, there's a good chance it's mallow, and it's entirely edible. Mallow leaves are a good source of vitamin A, vitamin C, and magnesium, and the leaves have a mild flavor with a slightly mucilaginous texture when cooked, similar to okra, which makes it a natural thickener for soups and stews. Mallow was so common in traditional diets across the Mediterranean and Middle East that its edibility was simply common knowledge, passed down without anyone thinking twice about it. Today, most people walk right past it, assuming it's just another patch of lawn weeds. Number 18. Plantain the weed, not the banana. This is one of the most misunderstood plants on the entire list, mostly because of its name. Broadleaf plantain has nothing to do with the banana-like fruit. It's the low, ribbed-leaf weed that grows in nearly every lawn, sidewalk crack, and disturbed patch of soil across the country. The young leaves are edible, and they carry a solid amount of vitamin A, vitamin C, and calcium. Traditionally, plantain leaves were also used topically for minor skin irritation, which is part of why this plant earned the nickname nature's Band-Aid among old-time herbalists. As a food, young leaves can be added raw to a salad or cooked down like a mild green. It might be the single most common, forgotten food in this entire list, simply because it's everywhere and almost nobody looks twice at it. Number 19. Violet leaves and flowers. The small, heart-shaped leaves and purple flowers of the common wild violet are entirely edible, and both the leaves and flowers carry a meaningful dose of vitamin C and vitamin A. The flowers have a mild, slightly sweet flavor and were traditionally candied or used to decorate desserts, while the leaves can be added to salads or lightly cooked. Violets were once considered such a valuable spring tonic that entire folk traditions grew up around harvesting the very first blooms of the season as a way to mark the true start of spring, and to give the body a gentle nutritional boost after winter. Number 20. Borage. We're closing out the list with borage, a plant with fuzzy, silvery green leaves and striking star-shaped blue flowers that pollinators absolutely love. Borage leaves and flowers carry a good amount of vitamin C and essential minerals, and the flavor is often compared to cucumber, cool and refreshing, which makes it a lovely addition to summer drinks and salads. Borage was traditionally grown alongside vegetable gardens, partly for its edible qualities and partly because it draws in bees and other pollinators, benefiting everything planted nearby. It's a plant that gave back to the whole garden, not just the person eating it, a small reminder that these old systems of growing food were rarely about just one plant in isolation. So there you have it, 20 forgotten plant foods, sitting quietly in yards, fence lines, ponds, and forgotten corners of gardens across the country, each one working like a small, natural multivitamin, entirely free of charge. Here's the honest truth behind why this knowledge disappeared. It wasn't because these plants stopped growing, and it wasn't because they stopped being nutritious. It disappeared because convenience took over. The grocery store made it easy to stop looking down at our own feet for food. A pill in a bottle made it easy to stop asking what the ground around us could provide. And little by little, across just a couple of generations, knowledge that had been passed down for thousands of years simply stopped being passed down at all. You don't have to let that knowledge disappear on your own homestead. Before you pull the next unfamiliar plant out of your garden bed, take a second look. Before you spray the next patch of weeds along your fence line, ask yourself what your grandparents might have called it and what they might have done with it. And here's one last thought before we close out. Nothing on this list requires you to abandon your grocery store trips or turn your backyard into a survivalist compound overnight. This isn't about extremes. It's about awareness. It's about walking past a patch of weeds along your fence line and actually knowing what's growing there, instead of seeing an undifferentiated green blur that needs to be sprayed or pulled. It's about looking at a rose bush in November and recognizing that those little orange hips left behind aren't garden waste. They're a free batch of vitamin C. Small shifts in awareness like that, repeated over and over across a growing season, add up to something real, a little more resilience, a little more self-reliance, and a genuine connection to the land that so many of us have lost touch with in the last few generations. A quick word of caution before you go out foraging on your own. Always be 100% certain of a plant's identification before eating it, since several edible plants on this list have toxic lookalikes. Only harvest from areas you know haven't been sprayed with herbicides or pesticides. And if you're pregnant, nursing, or managing a health condition, it's worth checking with a doctor or herbalist before adding any new wild food into a regular routine. Old knowledge is powerful, but it still deserves to be handled carefully and with respect. If this video opened your eyes to what's been growing around you this whole time, do me a favor and hit subscribe, because we've got a lot more forgotten homestead wisdom coming your way. The kind of knowledge that used to just get passed down around the kitchen table, and that we're bringing back, one video at a time. Drop a comment and let me know which one of these 20 surprised you the most, and if you've already got any of them growing on your property. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.